You can use nesting with control flow statements like if, for, and while for a more specific behavior of your Python program. This means using an if inside another if, a for inside another for, and a while inside another while loop. Let's use some basic examples to see what I mean. First, let's refer to the if statements. When nesting an if statement inside another if statement, we are actually telling Python that the indented code below the nested if should execute only if both statements are evaluated to true. So, let's say x equals the string Cisco. Okay. Now if I in x, then if len of x is greater than 3, let's print x and len of x. Okay, this is actually the same thing as the following. If, and let me use some parentheses for better readability, I in x and another pair of parentheses, len of x is greater than 3, colon, print x and len of x. Okay, in this case, just remember that the parentheses are there for a better view of the code. You can use them or not. I recommend using them whenever you feel the need to. Another thing to be careful about is indentation. When using nested structures, there are multiple levels of indentation created. So the second if statement is one level indented from the first one. Then the code which should run after evaluating the second if statement is again indented. So notice the indentation right here. So the print x and len of x statement is 2 levels away from the first if statement and 1 level of indentation away from the second if statement. This way we can easily use indentation as a delimiter between nested structures. This also applies to nested for and while loops. So keep in mind that each level of indentation changes the logic of the program. Anyway, it is recommended that you keep a low level of nesting to have a clear and readable program. So 2-level nesting, like in our example, should be just fine. Now let's look at nested for loops. Let's assume we have 2 lists and we want to multiply each element of the first list by each element of the second list. For this, we should iterate over both lists at the same time, taking each element into account, then do the multiplications and return the results. So let's say we have list 1 equals 4, 5, and 6, and list 2 is 10, 20, and 30. Now let's see the nested for loops. For I in list 1, now the nested for loop for j in list 2, the second level of indentation, and now print I times j. So what this code tells us is, dear Python, for the first element in list 1, take each element in list 2 and multiply them. Then for the next element in list 1, take each element in list 2 and multiply them as well, and so on until list 1 is exhausted. You can go back from the second indentation level to the previous one just by hitting tab once instead of twice, so that the new code is vertically aligned with the second for loop, so at this level of indentation right here. Let's see this. Let's say that after doing the multiplications we did for each element of list 1, we want to also print that element of list 1, just to have it printed out for each iteration. We can go back one indentation level and just type print I at the same level of indentation with the second for loop. So let me show you. For I in list 1, for j in list 2, print I times j. And now, getting back at the first level of indentation, print I. This is the result. Notice that we have the elements of list 1 somewhere in between the results of the multiplication. So 4, 5, and 6. Okay. Using a for loop inside another for loop can be pretty useful sometimes. Now let's look at while loops and consider the same example from the while loops lecture. So let's say we have x equals 1 while x is less than or equal to 10. Let's say print x and x equals x plus 1. So this returns all the numbers starting from 1 up to and including 10. Now let's see a nested while loop. So let me write this first. X equals 1, while X is less than or equal to 10. Let's say Z equals 5, X equals X plus 1. Now the nested while loop, while Z is less than or equal to 10, print Z, and Z equals Z plus 1. So notice that we have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 printed out 10 times. Now let's see the code. The first while loop does the same thing. It checks whether X is less than 10 or equal to 10. And as long as this condition is true, it increments X, and the new thing here, runs the second while loop each time the first loop is executed. Now the second while loop does the same thing as the first. It takes the value of Z, compares it with 10, then increments it by 1, and it does this as long as Z is less than or equal to 10. So the final result is made of the result of the second loop, which is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, printed out 10 times due to the first while loop. This is just a basic example of nesting while loops. The next thing I'll add here is nesting a structure inside a different structure. Let's try nesting an if statement inside a for loop. So let's try for number in range of 10 if 5 is less than or equal to number, and this is less than or equal to 9, then print number. Here the for loop iterates over the list created by the range of 10 function, so numbers 0 through 9. Then the if statement specifies a condition before printing the numbers. Actually, there are two conditions. The number should be greater than 5. This is the first part of the condition. And also it should be less than or equal to 9. This is the second part of the condition, in order to execute the indented code below the if statement. Okay, I think now you have a very good understanding of nesting and indentation, so it's time to move on to the next lecture.